Janad Trust here. In this video, we are going to break down how the economic machine works in 2025. So the economy operates like a machine driven by countless transactions where people, businesses, banks, and governments exchange money or credit for goods, services, and financial assets. So the three main forces behind economic movements are, number one, productivity growth, right? Productivity growth refers to the increased in the amount of output produced per unit of input, such as labor or capital, over time. So in simple terms, it means getting more done with the same or fewer resources, right? Now, the role in the economic machine is productivity growth is the key driver of long-term economic prosperity. So while economies experience cycles of expansion and contraction due to credit and debit, these cycles tend to cancel each other out over the long run, right? So what remains and steadily increases living standards is productivity growth. Now, here is how it works. There's efficiency movement. So businesses produce more output with the same inputs by adopting better management, right? Improving worker skills or using more effective processes. There's technological innovation, right? Which is the advances in technology that allow the same resources to generate more valuable goods and services. For example, computers and the internet have enabled workers to be far more productive than previous generations. So there's also knowledge sharing, right? When businesses and workers share knowledge, it creates positive spillovers that boost productivity across the economy. One of the reasons why productivity growth matters, or the majority of reasons, is the higher wages, right? So as productivity rises, businesses can afford to pay workers more without raising prices. Now, there's lower prices and higher profits. So increased efficiency can lead to lower costs, benefiting both consumers and business owners. There's strong economic growth. So over time, productivity growth is the main source of rising living standards and economic expansion, as simply adding more labor or capital, faces diminishing returns. Now, the second core principle is the short-term debt cycle. So it's often called the business cycle, typically lasts 5 to 8 years, and is a repeating pattern driven by the expansion and contraction of credit in the economy. Now, here's how it works. When credit is easily available, people and businesses borrow more, increasing spending and driving economic expansion. So this increased demand pushes up prices, leading to inflation. So as inflation rises, central banks like the Federal Reserve raise interest rates to cool down the economy. Higher rates make borrowing more expensive and increase debt repayments, so spending slows. Now, there's reduced spending that lowers incomes and demand, sometimes leading to a recession, which is economic contraction. So if the downturn is severe and inflation is no longer a concern, central banks lower interest rates again, making borrowing cheaper and encouraging spending. So this restarts the cycle. Here are the key points in this regard. So the cycle is mainly controlled by central banks adjusting interest rates. Each cycle usually ends, with higher debt and growth than the previous one, gradually increasing the overall debt burden in the economy. Over time, this process can contribute to the formation of larger long-term debt cycles. Now, the third core principle we have is the long-term debt cycle. And it basically describes how economies experience repeated periods of growth and recession, driven by accumulating debt over decades until the debt burden becomes unsustainable and triggers a major reset or deleveraging event. Now, here's how that works. Over short-term cycles, which is again 5 to 8 years, economies expand as credit is easily available, leading to growth in spending, incomes, and asset prices. So each cycle ends, with more debt than before. Over many such cycles, typically spanning 75 to 100 years, total debt grows faster than incomes because people and governments tend to borrow and spend more rather than pay down debt. So as debt accumulates, the cost of servicing it, the repayments, eventually outpaces income growth. So when this tipping point is reached, borrowers cut spending, which reduces incomes across the economy, making debts even harder to pay. So this triggers a deleveraging phase. Spending drops, asset prices fall, credit dries up and the economy contracts sharply, okay, often resulting in a depression or financial crisis. So after the reset, debts are reduced, through defaults, restructuring, or inflation, and the cycle can begin anew. Now, here's some key points to, understand in this regard. Productivity growth drives long-term prosperity, but debt cycles cause large swings around the productivity trend. So the long-term debt cycle ends with debt burdens becoming too large to sustain, forcing a painful adjustment period, right, before growth can resume. So recognizing when an economy stands or where it stands in this cycle helps anticipate risks and future growth potential. Now, here are some key mechanisms. You have the credit and debit and credit. What, Peter? Slap me across the face. Wow. What I meant to say was credit and debt cycles, right? Credit is central to economic growth. So when credit is easily available, borrowing and spending increase, leading to economic expansion. When credit tightens, spending slows, leading to recession. So these cycles repeat over short, which is about 5 to 8 years, and long periods. Now, the role of central banks, again, they influence the economy by adjusting interest rates and controlling money supply. Lowering rates encourages borrowing, and spending. Raising rates does the quite opposite. Now, the governmental impact, they collect taxes and spend money, influencing demand and economic activity. Policy changes such as tariffs or stimulus can have global ripple effects. Now, the 2025 outlook is the United States, right? A strong recent growth, but potential risk for policy shifts like the tariffs could disrupt both domestic and global economies. You have Europe, Germany in particular, facing stagnation due to weak demand and political uncertainty. Now, China, however, is struggling with local government debt, real estate issues, and high youth unemployment, with hopes pinned on new tech sectors and increased domestic demand. So the role of sustainability investing is crucial in this year's economy, right? So sustainable investing is set to play a significant and evolving role in 2025, shaping both financial markets and real-world outcomes. Now you have the continued growth and mainstreaming. So sustainable investment assets are projected to keep expanding, with global ESG assets under management expected to reach 34 trillion by 2026. Green, social, and sustainability linked bonds are anticipated to surpass 1 trillion in issuances, again in 2025, reflecting strong investor demand and favorable market conditions. Now, policy and regulation as drivers, you have the public policy and evolving regulations, particularly in the EU and US, are major forces shaping, the sustainable investing landscape. Regulatory changes such as the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation and new green bond standards are increasing transparency and credibility, further encouraging capital flows in sustainable assets. You have this shift toward real-world impact, so investors are moving beyond simply, setting ESG targets, focusing instead on tangible actions and financing the transition to a low-carbon economy. This includes funding both climate solutions and companies enabling broader adoption of green technologies, as well as supporting transition finance for hard-to-abate sectors. There are economic and business opportunities as well, right? Climate change is increasingly seen as an economic opportunity. Companies across sectors are developing and selling climate solutions, with sustainability now viewed as, both a financial and ethical imperative. Okay, so while sustainable investing faces challenges such as evolving definitions, data equality, right, and regional differences, the overall trend is toward greater integration of ESG sectors or factors in investment decisions and more mature, impactful, sustainable finance market. That's what I have for you today. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. See you in the next video.